The Ardennes in December kept its own kind of darkness, not the clean black of a moonless prairie, but a layered dark. Pine over fir, mist over snow, cloud pressing low enough to take your hat. A week before anyone in headquarters would say the words counteroffensive, the front here was a quiet seam stitched by small patrols and smaller rumors. The American Eighth Corps held a ragged line across the hills and logging tracks, green units rotating in from France to rest under a lid of iron sky. The maps called this sector a ghost front. The locals used a different word for ghosts. A squad from the 28th Infantry Division, Company G, 100 the 12th Regiment, moved along a logging trail that had frozen into corrugations of rutted ice. They wore wool and fatigue green under white bedsheet smocks, 2 men at a time taking the point with M1s held low to keep sights from frosting. On the corporal's back rode a canvas bag with a hand-cranked EE-8 field phone. The wireman let it spool off like a fisherman paying line into a cold river. Breath turned to sugar dust in the beam of a shielded flashlight and was gone. Baraka Michel was the last outpost of light along this plateau. A handful of stone buildings crouched against the wind where 3 roads met. In the cafe the day before, a woman with flour on her apron crossed herself when she heard their regiment number. Toujours les rouges, she said, meaning the patch, not the politics. Then softer, the old word that traveled these woods for centuries, loup-garou. She kept her eyes on their boots when she said it, as if naming something that looked up when you looked down. The lieutenant wrote it off as village theater. He preferred numbers to stories. His notebook listed the temperature, -8 Celsius, and the wind out of the northeast at 12 knots, with gusts that needled the gaps in a man's collar. Visibility varied by yard and whim. 1 minute, the fir trunks were crisp as rifle stocks. The next minute, the world collapsed to the reach of a gloved hand. Somewhere behind the line, a jeep backfired and died. The sound came late to the plateau, and later still to the patrol, stretched thin by trees. The first report had come 2 nights earlier from a roadblock near Hawkeye. A jeep crew heard something pace them in the ditch for 2 kilometers. 4 steps, pause, 4 steps again. The driver joked about wolves until the steps matched the engine's gear changes. When they stopped, the steps didn't. The gunner swore he saw a low shape glide across the road without weight enough to bruise the snow. He logged it as Canid large. The sergeant who signed the report added an asterisk and the word odd because he could not write impossible. Tonight, the odd traveled with Company G. The odor came first, not animal musk, not cordite, but a metallic sweetness like wet pennies warmed in a fist. It moved against the wind, which was wrong, and it rose when the men halted, which was also wrong. Private Hines, who trapped foxes in Pennsylvania, lifted his chin and tried to fix direction. "Upslope," he mouthed, but the smell seemed to unfurl from every dark place at once. They passed a boundary stone half buried in snow, its carving worn to a rune. The radio man marked their grid by coping sawtooth on a strip of tape. Beside him, the bar man shifted the weight on his shoulder and felt the strap go colder, as if the steel beneath the canvas had been left overnight in water. He flexed his hand. The knuckles ached. The ache felt borrowed. From the trees came the sound the locals had described in a handful of words and an avalanche of gesture. A padded gait that should have been soft, but wasn't, because the cold turned everything hard. 4 steps. Pause. 4 steps. A long space of nothing. Then 4 steps again, but closer now, as if the trail itself had learned to count and decided to answer. The point man lifted his fist and the squad knelt, each man settling into the quiet like a weight in a scale. The lieutenant tilted his wrist to his luminous dial watch. 2310. He whispered for the wireman to ring once, long, just once, to the listening post behind them. The wireman cranked, the magneto purred, and somewhere back down the line, a bell hit its tone in a mitten. To the right, beyond a stand of spruce, something moved between trunks with a velocity that did not match the space. It covered distance in a way that made distance irrelevant, sliding from one shadow to the next, without the courtesy of the in-between. Hines brought his rifle up without thinking and lowered it again as the shape stopped and lengthened. What had seemed the height of a man became the length of two on the ground, then reared into something taller than both and thinner than either, jointed where joints should not be. The lieutenant tasted iron. He remembered the flour-dusted woman and her refusal to look at faces when she told a soldier's fortune. He remembered reading an old German memo in a captured folder, some internal thing from a year before, complaining about nerves and night animals along this very ridge. The Germans had a word too. They always did. A branch cracked without falling. Snow fell without weight. The wireman hissed once, a small sound a man makes when his teeth chill all at once. On the trail behind them, a second set of steps joined the first. Not chasing, not flanking, mirroring. 4 and 4. Their own cadence returning from ahead and behind. The lieutenant did not believe in winter beasts that wore men's tracks like a borrowed coat. He believed in patrol intervals and fields of fire and the mathematics of artillery. Still, when he raised his hand to signal back, his fingers moved slowly, as if pushing through water, and he could not tell whether he was ordering a squad to withdraw or inviting something to follow. When they turned, the trail behind them was marked by their own prints, and by a second set that lay perfectly in the hollows, heavier, deeper, as if the forest had decided the men should weigh more than they did. The lieutenant closed his notebook on the number 12. In 2 days, shells would walk these hills, and nobody would talk about wolves. But tonight, the war breathed in the timber, and something old breathed with it, matching pace for pace, waiting for a man to stumble and leave the count uneven. The lieutenant gave the signal to halt, a flat palm lowered waist high, and the squad bled off its momentum in a ripple of crouches. Frosted breath hung in the red-filtered light from his hand torch as he unrolled the patrol map across his knee. The route was simple on paper. Push north along the ridge trail, check the abandoned sawmill, and loop back through a logging spur that would bring them inside their own wire by dawn. But the map did not show smells, nor the way sound carried sideways in these woods. Private Hines stood watch at the forward bend, the M1's muzzle angled down but ready, his gaze flicking between the trail and the trees. Behind him, the bar man, Corporal Ellison, eased his pack off one shoulder to fish out a fresh magazine. The steel was so cold it clung to the wool of his glove. The radio man, Private First Class, Rivaz, crouched over the EE-8 field phone, winding slack back onto the spool. The wire trailed south into the dark like a single thread, keeping the squad tethered to the rest of the war. When he cranked the magneto for a line check, the faint purr was overlaid with something else, an intermittent hum, rising and falling, as if another hand were on the same crank miles away, matching him for rhythm. The lieutenant tapped the map with his pencil. "We move in 2 elements," he whispered. "First team to the mill, check the interior, watch for tripwire. Second team arcs west through the gully, flank security. Rejoin at the split. No more than 20 minutes apart." He didn't mention wolves. He didn't have to. Every man had heard the pacing steps. Parkas rustled as the teams split, snow muffling the departure until only the faint crunch of boots and the occasional click of a sling swivel remained. The gully team slipped into the shadows between two dense walls of spruce. The mill team pushed ahead along the trail, skirting patches where the snow was discolored, as if something had pressed its weight there recently and melted it down to the needles. Ellison murmured from the rear, "Sir, smells stronger." It was the copper-sweet tang from before, now laced with the faint ammonia edge of fur left wet too long. It came and went like breath against the neck, regardless of wind direction. At 23 to 29 hours, the point man froze mid-step, one boot suspended above the snow. In the red light, a line of prints cut across the trail ahead, moving perpendicular to their route. The stride was long, the impressions narrow, ending in claws that had punched through the crust and left tiny avalanches on either side. No meltwater pooled in the bottoms, though the air was warm enough to take the edge off frostbite. The lieutenant knelt to inspect. The spacing was wrong for a wolf, too long for any dog. He brushed snow from one and saw that the pad marks were blurred, not from wind, but as if something wider had pressed down from above, smudging the details after they'd been made. Rivas's voice broke the hush. "Sir, we've got something on the line." The field phone receiver trembled in his hand, carrying not the voice of their listening post, but a slow, wet exhale. Then words, muffled, distorted, but in English. "Count, keep the count." The receiver went dead. The lieutenant folded the map and signaled to move. "Fast and quiet," he said. The men rose in unison, boots finding the narrow band of compacted snow where the noise was least. From far down the trail, too far for the gully team, too close for any friendly patrol, came the sound again. 4 padded steps, a pause, then 4 more, perfectly in time with their own. The squad moved in single file along the narrow cut of the gully, walls of snow-packed earth and frozen roots rising shoulder-high on either side. The space compressed sound, keeping every shuffle of boots close, every breath magnified. Yet between those familiar noises, something else bled in, a cadence just off their own, trailing by half a step. Hines kept glancing over his shoulder. He couldn't see past the man behind him, but the feeling was there, the knowledge of being one number too many in a count you'd memorized. Ellison's bar strap kept tightening against his shoulder. Twice he stopped to readjust it, convinced it was catching on a branch. The second time, he found the strap wet, as if a hand slick with melting snow had pulled it taut. The glove he wore came away smelling faintly of copper. At the bend in the gully, they came to a clearing where the snow had been disturbed. It wasn't a scuffle. There was no spray of powder, no churned dirt, just a wide, shallow depression the shape of an oval ringed by faint claw marks. The lieutenant crouched, running a hand along the edge. The snow was glazed here, ice slick, as though something had lain in it until its own heat turned the surface to glass. "Whatever made that wasn't here long," he murmured, "or it didn't need to be." Rivas's field phone, silent since the last incident, gave a sudden, muted click. He lifted the receiver and froze. The others could just make out the tinny, distant sound of a dog barking once, twice, then a man's voice, low, calm, counting, in German. The receiver popped, went dead, and would not reconnect. They pressed on, the gully narrowing until the sky was just a ribbon above. A pale fog clung to the snow at ankle height, moving against the wind. It wrapped their boots, curling around like smoke before trailing forward. Hines swore he saw shapes in it, thick-legged, long-armed, flitting from one wall to the other just ahead. But when he blinked, the fog was empty again. Somewhere above them, a branch cracked. Snow tumbled down the wall in a slow spill, dusting their helmets. No one looked up. Then came the sound from the ridge. 4 steps, heavy and deliberate, pacing them from above, matching their path without ever crossing their line of sight. Another set answered from behind. The echoes met and mingled in the gully until it was impossible to tell which direction held the source. Ellison whispered, "Feels like they're hurting us." The lieutenant gave no answer. His eyes were fixed on the trail ahead, where the snow suddenly ended, not from melting, but from absence. 10 feet of bare ground in the dead of winter, frozen earth stamped with prints too large for any wolf, too human for any bear. The strides were long and purposeful, vanishing into the dark like something that knew exactly how far ahead it needed to stay. They saw it first as a break in the tree line, an absence rather than a shape. The moonlight hit snow all around, but in the gap stood something that refused to take light. The lieutenant raised his binoculars, expecting shadow, maybe a German in white smock. What he caught instead were details that slid into focus too quickly. Fur matted with frost, ears forward, and still, shoulders hunched above a torso too long for a wolf and too narrow for a man. Its arms or forelegs hung low, claws nearly brushing the snow. And its eyes, catching the moon, were not animal bright, but dull, the color of old brass. The thing moved without hurry, stepping down toward the gully in long strides that did not break the snow crust. It covered the ground between trees as if it already knew their path. Heinz's M1 came up automatically. His breath fogged the sight, and in the moment he wiped it clear, the creature was closer. It had closed 20 yards without a sound. "Hold," the lieutenant ordered, voice tight but steady. His mind was parsing ranges, fields of fire, avenues of retreat, but nothing fit, not against something that seemed to choose where it could be seen. The air changed, colder at the edges, sharp with the same copper-sweet tang that had haunted them since Barak Michel. Rivas's field phone gave a short, sharp ring on its own, and every man in the squad flinched. He didn't pick it up. The creature stopped at the lip of the gully, just above their left flank. For the first time, it made a sound, not a growl, but a low, chest-deep exhale that pushed mist over the snow like smoke. It tilted its head, and in the tilt was something wrong. Curiosity mixed with recognition. Then it moved. Not down into the gully, but parallel to them, pacing along the ridge. Every few steps it would vanish behind a tree and reappear too far ahead for the speed to make sense. When it passed through a patch of open snow, the prints it left were perfect. Human in shape, enormous in size, claw tips digging deep. Ellison tracked it with the BAR, finger poised. "Sir, if I wait any longer, I'm gonna—" "Not yet," the lieutenant cut him off. The creature stopped again, turned its head toward them, and opened its mouth. The sound that came out was neither howl nor speech, but somewhere between, low, resonant, carrying syllables that almost meant something. Half the men thought they heard German. The others swore it was French. All agreed on the last word. Zealand, count. The wind died entirely. In the stillness, the squad's own heartbeats seemed too loud. The thing lifted one arm, slow and deliberate, claw pointing at the lieutenant. Then it lowered itself into the snow and began moving forward on all fours, silent, fast. "Light it up!" M1's cracked, the bar roared, muzzle flashes painting the trees in strobing orange. Snow spat from bullet impacts. The creature didn't flinch. It didn't even slow. And when it reached the point where the rounds should have torn into flesh, it wasn't there. Just a swirl of snowflakes spinning upward, then settling back to the ground. In its place were tracks, fresh, deep, steaming in the cold. They led forward 10 paces, then simply stopped, ending in untouched snow. The squad broke formation, rifles sweeping the ridge where the thing had vanished. Frost clung to their sleeves like powdered glass, sparkling in the dim light from the cloud-muted moon. Nobody spoke. Then, movement. Not ahead, but behind. The first sound was the crunch of snow under a single, deliberate step. Then another. When they turned, the creature was there, at the far end of the gully, blocking the way back. It stood upright now, nearly man-height, but with shoulders hunched and head forward, as though every part of it leaned toward the hunt. The lieutenant gave the order without looking away. Fire! M1s barked, muzzle flashes throwing brief snapshots of teeth, claws, and the long shadow it cast against the gully wall. Ellison's bar thundered, tracers cutting bright arcs into the night. Rounds tore splinters from the pines and sent fountains of snow into the air. The creature moved through it all like smoke through branches. Bullets passed into and out of it without slowing, each impact producing no more than a faint shimmer in its outline. It charged. Snow exploded under its stride, claws raking the gully wall for purchase as it closed the gap in seconds. Hines stumbled back, slipping on the packed trail. The thing's arm lashed out, not to strike, but to seize. Its claws sank into the leather sling of Hines's rifle, tearing it away as easily as lifting a leaf from the ground. Rivas swung the butt of the field phone at its head. The metal made contact, but the sensation was wrong, like striking wet cloth stretched over nothing. The creature turned toward him, and for the first time, he saw its mouth open fully. Inside was not a throat, but darkness, deep enough to swallow the moonlight whole. It lunged, not at Rivas, but past him, its movement so sudden the squad's fire went wild. It landed among them, scattering men into the snow. A claw caught Ellison's pack, shredding the canvas as if it were paper. Inside, the extra bar magazines clattered into the snow, each one steaming in the cold. The lieutenant drew his sidearm, the .45's bark sharp in the narrow space. He emptied the magazine into the thing's torso at point-blank range, and it staggered, but not from pain. More like surprise, as if the noise itself was what made it pause. That pause was all they had. "Move!" the lieutenant roared. They pushed north, boots hammering the packed snow, the creature's steps thundering behind. 4 and 4, always 4 before the pause, the rhythm burned into their nerves. When the trail opened onto a frozen meadow, the squad broke into 2 lines, firing into the dark tree line to keep it at bay. The thing emerged from the gully, but this time it did not charge. It paced at the edge of the trees, its breath pluming white in the still air. Then slowly, it bent down, pressed one clawed hand into the snow, and dragged it forward, leaving a single, deep line that ran the full width of the meadow. It stepped back into the shadows. The wind returned, carrying the sound of something moving away, not running, but walking. 4 steps. Pause. 4 steps again, fading into the forest. The lieutenant didn't lower his weapon until the sound was gone. The night had drained the color from everything. The snow lay flat and dull, the trees black silhouettes against a sky the shade of pewter. Breath hung in the air longer than it should have, and the cold had a weight to it, something that pressed on the chest as much as it stung the skin. The squad stood in a rough semicircle along the meadow's southern edge, staring at the line the creature had carved into the snow. It was deeper than they'd thought, half a boot's height, and frozen solid at the edges, as if the cold had followed the claw like ink from a pen. The cut ran unbroken from one tree line to the other, a boundary drawn with the precision of a surveyor and the finality of a grave. Hines crouched beside it, gloved hand brushing away loose powder. "Not drifted over," he muttered. Something kept the wind off it. Behind them, Ellison retrieved the shredded remains of his pack. The bar magazines inside were coated with a thin layer of ice, their brass casings dull, as though months had passed overnight. He didn't reload them. Rivas uncoiled the field phone wire to check the line. It was intact all the way to the meadow's edge, then stopped dead at the claw line, the cut ends fused together in a bead of ice. The copper inside had gone black. They found tracks, but not just from the night before. Along the western tree line, a second set had appeared, parallel to their own patrol trail from 2 days earlier, as if the thing had been shadowing them before they ever knew it was there. Some of the prints overlapped their boot marks exactly, heel to toe, like a man stepping in another's path to hide his own. The lieutenant ordered a sweep of the meadow before first light broke fully. The search turned up nothing living. No birds, no hair tracks, no scat. Even the wind seemed reluctant to cross the space. When the first sunbeam touched the snow, it bled color into the claw mark before anywhere else, the white turning a faint, sickly yellow that faded as the day warmed. They didn't linger. By 0725 hours, the squad was moving south, keeping to the trail and avoiding every patch of open ground. The claw line stayed behind them, but the sense of it did not. When they reached their own wire, the listening post on duty swore he'd heard them approach twice. Once at dawn and once in the middle of the night, hours before they actually returned. The lieutenant filed the morning report under unusual contact and left the specifics blank. The official report for Patrol 7A, filed by Lieutenant Harrow, was barely 2 paragraphs long. It recorded a non-engagement with unidentified movement north of Barak Michel, the discovery of unusual animal tracks, and a boundary obstruction of uncertain origin. No mention of the claw line in the snow, no mention of the pacing steps, and certainly nothing about the thing that had matched their march in the dark. The battalion intelligence officer, Captain Wolcott, read the draft once, crossed out the word tracks, and replaced it with impressions. He underlined uncertain origin twice, then sent the file to regimental for archiving. It was stamped no further action and filed in a box marked Field Incidents, Unverified. Ellison's shredded pack was discarded. The iced-over bar magazines were handed to Ordnance for disposal, their surfaces already tarnished beyond use. The broken end of Rivas's field phone wire disappeared into the hands of a signals tech who did not log its serial number. In the days that followed, the Ardennes erupted into chaos. The German counteroffensive rolled west, artillery and armor drowning out the memory of any quiet menace. Patrol 7A was split up and reassigned, their names scattered across different sectors. By January, 2 of them were listed missing in action, but the story remained. Among the men who stayed in the Ardennes through that winter, there were whispers about a ridge near Barak Michel where snow never lay quite right, where 4 steps could be heard pacing just beyond the trees. Veterans called it Le Pas du Loup, the wolf's step, and warned replacements not to linger there. Some swore the Germans avoided the ridge entirely, calling it Zählstrecke, the counting ground. Locals told older versions. In taverns and kitchens, they spoke of the Loup-garou des Hautes Fagnes, the wolf-man of the high fens, who marked those who entered his hunting grounds and followed them until the count was complete. Sometimes the marked returned. Sometimes they didn't. After the war, Harrow never mentioned the patrol in interviews. When asked about superstition at the front, he'd smile without humor and say only, "There are things the woods remember that the rest of us shouldn't." 50 years later, a Belgian forestry worker found a rusted length of field phone wire in the snow near Barak Michel. It was fused at one end into a bead of metal and ice, the copper black as if it had burned cold. He took it home, intending to throw it away, but kept it in a drawer after a neighbor told him what day it was found, the anniversary of the patrol. On some winter nights, when the wind slides low through the high fens, hunters still claim they can hear it. 4 slow, deliberate steps, a pause, and 4 more, always just far enough away to be heard, never close enough to be seen.